on an Executive Sustainability Forum, delivering a fair transition to net zero for Indonesian companies. This event is a collaboration event between DSS Plus and Bisnis Indonesia. I would like to introduce myself. My name is Stefanus Valen, and I'm happy to be here as your host for today. This virtual event will last for 2 hours, and we will record this event in an archive. You can ask questions to the speakers today through Q&A feature on your Zoom application, and I will deliver those questions to the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, climate science tells us that today, what we see that the Earth has warmed about 1.1 degrees Celsius relative to the pre-industrial time. The impact of this global warming is felt around the world, from increased severity of flooding to increased prevalence of things like the heat waves. The net zero imperatives commitments that we have seen across companies and countries is to prevent the buildup of these greenhouse gas emissions that are resulting in the warming of the Earth. There are certainly parts of the economy that contributes directly to the greenhouse gas emissions, things like the power systems and the mobility and transportation systems. There's a whole set of energy and land use systems ranging from power to mobility to industry that all contribute directly to emissions. Swift action is required to address climate change and transition to a net zero economy. Yet, transitioning to clean energy risks growing inequality with a loss of jobs and investment in impacted communities. Companies have a critical role to play in this shift by managing their transitions in a way that is just and fair for the people and the local communities involved. Organization and company leaders are challenged with several tough questions to meaningfully move towards net zero emissions. United Nations considered Indonesia as one of the superpower countries in countermeasuring the climate change. In response, Indonesia has set in play a series of ambitious energy transition commitments in the lead up to COP26. These include committing to a new capacity coming from renewable energy in the next 10 years, implementing a coal phase-out program, establishing carbon pricing and trading policy, and promoting new industries that support a green economy to ensure a just and fair energy transition. Indonesia government has set targets for emission reduction and net zero emission by 2060 or sooner. Indonesia is committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 29% by 2030 with their own efforts, or up to 41% with international support. Whilst a sustainable transition should not be at the cost of sustained growth and delivering value or social equity, it is possibly the most complex issue faced by the management teams today. As a result, many companies are still determining what their role should be in navigating the energy transition, their strategy, and plans for responding to the challenges and capturing the opportunities this transition creates. To discuss and explore more thoroughly, DSS Plus Sustainable Solutions, together with Bisnis Indonesia, present today's program, Executive Sustainable Forum, delivering a fair transition to a net zero for Indonesian companies. We will kick off the event with a speech from our keynote speakers, Bapak Agus Edi Siregar, Deputy Commissioner for Financial System Stability, OJK, which will then be followed up by two presentations. First one will be from Mr. Mark Dickinson, Global Head of Energy Transition and Decarbonization from DSS, and Bapak Rino Dono Seputro, Vice Chairman, ASEAN and President Commissioner, Standard Chartered Bank Indonesia. We will also have a panel discussion who will be partaken by Ministry of National Development, Bappenas, our presenters, and two major company representatives from energy sectors. Panel discussion will be partaken by Pak Syahril Rahma Atas, Senior Vice President Enterprise Risk Management of PT Pertamina Persero, Bapak Rusdi Husin, General Manager HSE Risk Management and Crisis Team Leader PT Adaro Energy Indonesia Tbk, Insinyur Medruzam, Master Professor Economy PhD, Director for Environmental Affairs, Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. Through this panel discussion, we seek on how each panel participant manage a diverse set of risks and how best to capture opportunities in transitioning their organization to net zero, government's commitment on sustainable development, and the role of financial industry in transitioning to a net zero economy. At the end of this forum discussion, panelists will also answer some questions from our audiences today. Audiences are welcome to ask questions through the question box, a Q&A button on your application, and we will pick some of those questions that comes in. Please also advise to whom you would like to address those questions to. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Bapak Agus Edi Siregar, Deputy Commissioner for Financial System Stability, OJK, to deliver keynote speech from OJK. Bapak Agus, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pak Stefanus. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Honorable presenter and panelists, we have Pak Medrizam here from Bappenas, Pak Syahril Rahmat from Pertamina, my colleague Mr. Rino from Standard Chartered Bank, Mr. Mark Dickinson from DSS, and also Mr. Rusdi Husin from Adaro Energy. Esteemed speaker, representative of international institution, investor, and stakeholders. I would like to convey my highest appreciation to Bisnis Indonesia for hosting this Executive Sustainable Forum. It is deemed a pertinent topic considering the current development of global and domestic economic condition in combating climate change, yet we are gradually moving to a greener economy. Let me start by saying this. Indonesia GDP in 2021 grew by 3.7% year on year, compared to minus 2.1% in 2022. Along with the increase in people's mobility and the upsurge of domestic consumption, which contribute more than 50% of our GDP, as well as the recovery of the investment. We also see some improvement in several leading indicators. As of February, our consumer confidence index is around 113.1. It's beyond the optimistic level that support increased consumption. On the other hand, Purchasing Manager Index as of February is also in the expansion zone for the 5 consecutive months. This is the highest level in the ASEAN. We know the pandemic has caused what we call scaring effect in the economy that make it no longer possible to do business as usual. Hence, a new source of economic growth is needed. But we also know the global volatilities in the economic could disrupt our economic performance. The unwinding policy or tapering from global advanced economy is added in by the volatilities that currently happen in Russia and Ukraine. This will add to a long list of challenges in our economy, either in the short or medium term. Ladies and gentlemen, the recent global agenda on climate change demand a transition to a green economy. Our host already stated that the greenhouse gas emissions is globally should be keeping global temperature not increase at maximum 1.5%. In Indonesia, we are aiming to reduce 41% of GHG emission by 2030 with international assistance. This commitment is stated in our NDC, or what we call it Paris Agreement, and the long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience. Furthermore, issues related to sustainable finance will also be the one of the priority agenda in Indonesia presidency at the G20 in this year, in 2022. In this regard, OJK support the deliverable expected from the development of Sustainable Finance Working Group that is led by Indonesia government. On the area of financial services industry, in our view, climate change has impact at least in two aspects. First is how to accelerate sustainable financing by financial institutions, because it is requested by the stakeholder of those financial institutions. I mean, the market pressure, the market discipline on this sector is huge. The second issue is climate change has become the new source of financial risk. I will come into this issue in the later stage. But the ongoing trend of climate change, including higher temperature, more extreme weather, will result economic and financial losses to many businesses, households, and even government. Additionally, the uncertainty about the severity and the timing of these losses is a source of financial risk. Aligning these issues to our role here in OJK as a financial supervisor, OJK commitment to accelerate financial sustainable finance is reflected in our two roadmap of sustainable finance, which was initiated in 2015 and has reached two stages of implementation. The first one has ended in 2019, and we are now continuing in the second phase from 2020 to 2024. The strategic target of the roadmap of sustainable finance cover the establishment of the ecosystem which support the acceleration of sustainable finance, increasing the supply and demand for environmentally friendly as well as a strengthening surveillance and coordination in sustainable finance in Indonesia. Moreover, the Sustainable Banking Finance Network SBFN in 2021 classified Indonesia, along with the People's Republic of China and Colombia, as countries in the consolidating stage in the context of regulation of sustainable finance, a step ahead of the advancing milestones. In that regard, to further accelerate the transition to a low carbon economy in Indonesia, OJK has launched the second phase of our sustainable finance roadmap from 2021 to 2025, focusing to create comprehensive sustainable finance ecosystem that involve all related parties and promote collaboration at various levels. Let me cascade one by one of what OJK focused in our strategic initiative in order to implement our sustainable finance roadmap. First is Indonesia Green Taxonomy. The Green Taxonomy is a clear guidance for the financial institution and issuers across industry in classifying the green sector with nationally validated threshold. Indeed, it is due to the conservativeness of the threshold to avoid greenwashing practices. While the red list in the green taxonomy is not a negative list, OJK encouraged the financial institution and the business players to adopt the green taxonomy in the transition process to the green economy. We also developed the regulatory framework for carbon exchange. The government and OJK are currently in close coordination in reviewing the development of carbon trading as mandated in Presidential Regulation number 98 of 2021 on the implementation of carbon economic value to facilitate business actors in achieving GHG emission. Carbon emission have the potential to be recognized as commodities or securities. This categorization will affect carbon trading mechanism. However, it is still an ongoing discussion, but in this regard, OJK is ready to carry out the supervisory role should the carbon emission is determined as securities or financial instrument. We also developed financial reporting system within financial services sector that include green financing instrument in accordance with the new green taxonomy. In this year, we are focusing on the transmission of green taxonomy into green reporting, getting a sufficient picture of the magnitude of the green portfolio in the financial institution. With that in mind, we will develop incentive or disincentive policy that will spur new green product and services. We also developed the risk management framework for financial industry and risk-based supervision guideline for our supervisor. Climate-related financial risks will be one of the risks that are concerned to global and domestic stakeholders. Standard setting bodies and other jurisdictions recognize that climate-related financial risk is a source of financial risk. Therefore, supervisor must ensure that the financial system is resilient to this risk. It is necessary to integrate climate-related financial risk into prudential supervision. For this reason, in the future, climate-related financial risk will become a component of prudential regulation in the financial sector. Hence, it is necessary to increase awareness of players in the financial services sector. There is a lot also another initiative to increase awareness and capacity building to all stakeholders, as we know that this green financing, renewable energy, and others issue with regard to the green economy is relatively new to our stakeholders. This initiative will align with the presence of what we call Task Force on Sustainable Finance in financial services sector. Ladies and gentlemen, honorables, with that in mind, I think having close coordination and cooperation in designing policy and acquiring high commitment from all relevant parties, the implementation of sustainable finance in Indonesia will be accelerated in achieving the global goal set out in the Paris Agreement. I will stop here, Mr. Stefanus. Thank you. I'll back to you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Pak Agus, thank you so much for your very insightful background from OJK. I think that has provided us and the speakers with a lot of information, especially now as OJK has started moving into green economy in phase 2 of that green economy. It's very, very interesting to hear that, especially on the creating a green financing instrument where the carbon emission can be commodity and or security. So that obviously will create a lot of opportunities for the industries out there. So that's really, really good. Thank you. My understanding you you sadly will not be joining our discussion today, Pak Agus. So that's really unfortunate.
I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, you have other agenda. So if you don't mind, probably before you leave this session, and we will carry on obviously with that topics that you started and those insights from OJK. Probably we can take a picture together, a virtual picture, to commemorate this event. Okay. All good? Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Thank you so much. Pak Agus, once again, thank you for your time and joining the event and the contribution for AJK on here. Thank you so much. We are now moving to our presentation sessions. As I mentioned previously, there are 2 presentations that will be presented in this forum. The first one from DSS Sustainable Solution as the management consultant, and the second one from Standard Chartered Bank Indonesia from the financial industry. Both presentations would share their strategy and suggestions for Indonesian business to take part on the Indonesian net zero economy. Now, I would like to welcome Mr. Mark Dickinson, Global Head of Energy Transition and Decarbonization from DSS Plus. Mark Dickinson is here to share some of DSS methodology approach for heavy industry to plan for and deliver the net zero economy. Mr. Mark, the virtual stage is yours.
Hello. Good afternoon. Selamat siang. Can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, Pak. We can see your screen.
Okay. Okay, honored guests, dear colleagues, today I'm going to talk a little bit more about practical steps for energy transition for heavy industry. We all know that energy transition and climate change are amongst the biggest challenges that businesses in Indonesia will face. And like your colleagues across the planet, this is the most difficult time in making decisions on capital investment to make sure that climate change is addressed, but while firms are still delivering profitable growth. So today I'm going to talk about, first of all, a quick definition of what energy transition is. What does the energy transition look like practically for Indonesia? And what does that mean for big industry? And at the end, I'll share our approach, our methodology for supporting clients in delivering the capabilities they need to deliver net zero, but also to formulate the net zero roadmap for their business. But first, who are DSS Plus? So we are an organization that was spawned out of DuPont through some rebranding, some additional acquisitions. We are now an independent management consulting firm specializing in operational risk, operational excellence, and sustainability. We've got 100 plus sustainability professionals globally, and we offer services in things like energy transition, decarbonization, sustainable finance, waste management, social impact, value chains, stakeholder engagement, etc., etc. Our new focus is to support clients in formulating their roadmaps or their strategy and in implementing them. So we intend to be a responsible partner in the energy transition. So our new brand is Protect, Transform and Sustain. So transformation is at the core of our offerings in sustainability, risk and operations. So very quickly, energy transition means different things to different people, but I'll offer this definition. It is the balance of a series of risks and obligations while still delivering responsible growth. So the obligations on the left are, first of all, protecting your business from the physical risk of climate change, which Pat Algos was talking about, but also to prepare your business for policy and regulation changes, which we're obviously beginning to see in Indonesia now, technology development, and sooner or later, the change in consumer preferences. If we think about what's happening in other parts of the planet, there is a demand for green electricity amongst consumers. The other commitments that have to be balanced are reduction of emissions, and that includes fuel usage, supply chain, and project fabrication. It also includes getting hands on finance, which, depending on what industry you're in, becomes increasingly more difficult. So this area of transition finance, where you would hope to achieve finance for your delivering your decarbonization roadmap, is an emerging area with, let's say, not an entirely cast in stone set of definitions. All of this also leads to market and price volatility, but at the same time, energy transition can offer some differentiation. It can offer some opportunities, all on the path for delivering responsible growth. So that's the definition of energy transition as we work with it at DSS Plus. So what does the net zero roadmap for Indonesia look like? So I did a little bit of a literature review, and an organization called the Institute of Essential Services Reform in Indonesia suggest a rather aggressive but necessary energy transition roadmap. So they're saying that the first phase is no new coal and 100 gigawatts of solar power and 2 gigawatts of solar PV prosumers, meaning individual communities and or households that put solar panels on the roof and put small amounts of electricity back to the grid. To put it in context, 100 gigawatts of solar power is more than the entire installed capacity of electricity in the UK. That is not a small amount of solar. In stage 2, the IESR are even more aggressive in saying that Indonesia has to be 100% renewables, utility scale renewables. Coal has to be well on its way to retirement, and that 200 gigawatts of hydrogen electrolyzers are required. These are huge targets. They really are. The common factor to all of this is the electricity system. So reforming the electricity system is going to be a major issue that I see as an opportunity for business to partner with the distribution company. The electricity sector in Indonesia has been a huge enabler of growth. I mean, some remarkable figures here. The World Bank tells us that there were 34 million customers connected to the grid in the last 10 years, and that the grid continues to grow. But as Indonesia is an archipelago of hundreds of islands, then there are complications in managing and designing that distribution and transmission grid. Unfortunately, the grid is also the source of a large amount of emissions. In fact, it's largely coal-based, and there's been a growth in coal. So the emissions activity is quite high. The sector also suffers from a lack of space for renewables, the grid complexity of the islands, some well-embedded coal-fired power stations which would be difficult to change. And I would also suggest some further work in a pro-renewables set of legislations to encourage the proliferation of renewables. So I really see this as a partnership between the electricity sector, government, and big business. And the reason for that is the IRENA, which is an international intergovernmental panel on renewables, identify an enormous renewables potential for Indonesia. Their figures have wind as 532 gigawatts. Again, that's 7 times the entire installed capacity of electricity generation in the UK. So there's a lot of opportunity. But that opportunity is going to be scattered over different places in Indonesia. And the way I look at it is there are, specific businesses, specific industries in those areas. So those industries, those firms are going to have to become the agents of change, and divesting their fuel sources from fossil fuel intensive electricity generation to renewables. It's within their interest, and it's also within their interest to cooperate with their industrial partners geographically. So what does that situation mean for Indonesian industry? So DSS would offer these success factors, if you will. The first is energy efficiency. This is a global theme. Heavy industry is focusing on finding the technical limit for energy efficiency, meaning finding the limit whereby you cannot achieve any further efficiency because you're technology constrained. This is important because when you do come to invest in renewables, you don't want to be investing in electricity production simply because of inefficient practices. That is a waste of capital. So driving energy efficiency in current businesses is the very first step. Secondly, detailed or granular emissions accounting across your business processes is also key. And again, we strive to help clients find the technical limit for their industrial plant, i.e., given the technology they have, they can't reduce emissions any further by operational practices. Apart from that, the next step is, and this is something we're encouraging clients across the planet to do, which is get involved in your local distribution grid. And the reason for this is building renewables is not core business for a lot of businesses, but there are other industrial firms within your geographic range. They're also suffering the same challenges in emissions reduction and green power. So a mine cooperating with a cement plant cooperating with, I don't know, an oil and gas company in building green power to reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions is critical, because then those guys can also get involved in building the local distribution grid and potentially deriving revenue from grid strengthening and selling surplus power either back to the grid or to local communities. But this cooperation around grid strengthening and the distribution grid is an emerging best practice. So that leads to partnering. We're seeing interesting partnerships right across the planet, from mining companies that are collaborating directly with Elon Musk and Tesla, to companies partnering with large manufacturing bases like NEOM in Saudi Arabia. So depending on the energy transition issue, unusual partnerships are emerging. One of the opportunities in partnership that I see for Indonesia is there seems to be a large potential for carbon capture and storage technology, meaning there are, due to Indonesia's oil and gas history, there are disused reservoirs around that have a potential to store dense phase CO2. But unfortunately, progression, like other parts of the planet, has not been ideal with carbon capture and storage. So we see partnership as unlocking that particular conundrum. One of the other opportunities is hydrogen. There are many organizations across the planet organizing and building very large hydrogen production facilities. That is particularly relevant for Indonesia being a set of islands. So some of the choices available to industry would be, do I build my own renewable capabilities locally to power my industry, or do I buy hydrogen from someone else as a new fuel for my industry and then undertake and manage the risks of a hydrogen supply chain? But because of Indonesia's unique geography, a hydrogen tanker can easily access large parts of Indonesia, provided there are mooring facilities in place.
Sorry, Mark, just cautious of time, so yeah, it's just...
Okay, I'll finish. Our framework is, we help clients with understanding all of the elements within the energy transition roadmap, and that includes looking at policy, setting targets for energy and emissions reduction, making sure you identify all the risks and opportunities, making sure you're operationally efficient, helping you with the latest technology and bringing it into the business plan, engaging with your partners, and ultimately how to make decisions in capital investment. And my one parting message is an Indonesian proverb: diligence is the beginning of brilliance. So I ask you to be diligent in your energy transition planning.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. That's great presentation. I think it's just reinstated some of the words that Agus mentioned before. You know, to deliver this net zero, obviously we need collaborations or particular parties, and there are steps obviously need to be taken to achieve that. So thank you for that. We will discuss that a bit further later on in the forum discussion, if you may. So we just leave it at that at this point of time. So I would like to move on to the next presentation. Next presentation, which is our last but not least presentation from Pak Rino Donoseputro, Vice Chairman, ASEAN and President Commissioner of Standard Chartered Bank Indonesia. Pak Rino will be presenting Standard Chartered Bank Indonesia as financial industry's role in transitioning companies into net zero economy. Pak Rino, or probably a bit more familiar being called Pak Doni. Pak Doni, thank you so much for your time. So I will provide the virtual stage for you to present. Thank you, Pak Doni.
Thank you, Stephanos, and I hope you can hear me just fine. I got my slides actually there, and while waiting for that actually to be put up, I just wanted to say actually thank you to Bisnis Indonesia and DSS for the opportunity, and the Honorable Pak Agus Edi Siregar, Deputy Commissioner for Financial System Stability of OJK, Mark Dickinson, Global Head of Energy Transition for DSS, other panelists, a very good afternoon. And I think I'll just start the next slide, please. I think we talked a lot actually about this. To be quite honest, I think Pak Agus Edi actually has set the scene actually really well. I mean, there's quite a lot of topics actually there to discuss. I'll make it actually quite short. I got a few slides actually to share with the audience here. Essentially, the transition to net zero carbon emission is the challenge of our generation, really. And Paris-aligned goals require industries and economies to change at a historic pace, something that we've never seen before. Now, the thing is actually it's race against time. The window to decarbonize and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial level is rapidly closing. Now, we see during the COP26 last year, many countries, including Indonesia, have reiterated their net commitments to net zero, and meeting these targets will result in a significant reshaping of the global economy. This will have profound implications for financial markets. Financial markets itself will need to evolve to integrate climate-related risk and opportunities into strategies. Next slide, please. As Pak Agus Edi has alluded there earlier, we believe finance and capital is critical in addressing the transition. Now, there is a challenge despite the accelerated trends towards greater investment in climate change and other sustainable outcomes. We know that more progress is really needed. The IFC has identified about $23 trillion in climate-smart investment opportunities in 21 emerging economies alone between now and 2030. And despite 10% year-on-year increase in climate finance since 2013, around $3 to $5 trillion is still needed annually for abatement and mitigation investment alone to reach the 1.5 degree scenario in emerging markets. Now, emerging markets, particularly ASEAN, have both the greatest opportunity to adopt low carbon technology and some of the toughest transition financing and climate challenges. We did a research at the end of last year called Zeronomics, where we talk globally to a number of executives around different sectors in industry. And we found that greatest barrier to net zero transition is really the lack of finance. And in particular, the carbon intensive industries and emerging markets are struggling the most in getting financing that they badly need. It found that 85% of companies require medium to high levels of finance to transition, and that rises to 91% of companies in carbon intensive sectors. So this is a huge financing gap. Now, another research that we did called the carbon dated research found that carbon intensive companies are struggling to raise finance for net zero transition as investors, interestingly, increasingly prioritize companies with higher ESG ratings and a lower carbon footprint. Now, this actually puts a quandary actually in a way. Having said that, the transition to net zero also presents the biggest funding opportunity of the current decade from financial sector perspective. So you see that shifting the global economy onto a more sustainable path will require a significant redirection of global investment flows towards clean and sustainable financing. But that's exactly where opportunities are exponentially growing. Fixed income so far has been playing a very key role. We see a steady and increasing growth in sustainable finance issuance and borrowings in recent years. As you can see on the right-hand side, we expect the so-called green, social, sustainable, and sustainability-linked bond issuances to surge over the next few years. We are forecasting the GSSS bonds to grow to 1.7 trillion in this year, increasing to 4.2 trillion in 2025. We see actually that the events such as the COP26 actually has played as a catalyst to this. Indonesia has one of the largest opportunities. We estimated actually that there's 148 billion of private sector capital opportunities for Indonesia to provide a safe, reliable, and low carbon power supply alone. Next slide, please. We are seeing globally an increased prominence and awareness of the sustainability agenda. Over 3,000 global companies have already made firm commitments to net zero. And this has really been a great driver from the private sector on the voluntary side, where companies actually have put a bit of a race actually among themselves actually to embrace net zero. Now, this can multiply further because the corporate commitments are a driving force as it adds pressure to their supply chain partners. As you can see, companies like Amazon, IKEA, Unilever, or major global consumer goods producers and distributors, they have committed to sustainable supply chain. And naturally, you can expect these internal forces to drive behaviors from the rest of their ecosystem. On the financial industry, we see lenders and investors committed to aligning to net zero. There's numerous either private sector or public sector alliances actually that have been created. The Network for Greening the Financial System, for example, this is an alliance of 91 central banks in the world. There's also this Net Zero Banking Alliance. This is on the back of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ, that was set up actually during the COP with over 100 members and about 40% of global banking assets. So there's actually quite a number of things actually like this happening. We also see, as Pak Agus already highlighted, Indonesia definitely is not alone, but it's one of the most progressive. There is an accelerating regulatory focus on sustainable agenda. The ESG disclosure requirements on stock exchanges around the world, the OJK regulation roadmap to sustainability, Bank of England climate stress tests, and capital requirements regulation, actually where there are incentivization method actually being put actually there. Next slide, please. There is just one thing actually I wanted to highlight as well. In all of these transitions, actually it's very important actually when we see, because globally the landscape is not similar. Each country will have a different pace of transition. In fact, actually each sector and industry should be treated individually, and the shift to low carbon economy for developing countries should be gradual. So for example, the pace and transition in West Europe will be very different to the ones in Nigeria, Ghana, or Indonesia for that matter. Now, to reach net zero, investors can't just walk away from carbon intensive sector. Financing these companies help them invest in the research and development critical for developing clean technologies and pivoting their business models. Further, there is a need to agree on parameters, how and who should validate such just transition. We have suggested, as we are part of the B20 on the Finance and Infrastructure Task Force, that formulating a common criterion and perhaps authorizing the likes of UNFCCC to endorse just transition plan would provide cover from potential external pressure which come at a different transition perspective, because there are different expectations from either NGOs or any other parties in the world. Next slide, please. Now, I think actually I've made it quite clear the role of banks in supporting net zero transition cannot be underestimated. As banks, actually, typically there are two objectives: reduce their own emissions and also reduce on becoming net zero from their financing activities, because banks actually do support other industries. There are many ways that banks can contribute in driving sustainable finance, deploying balance sheet and mobilizing capital as an advisor for client, creating innovative financing vehicles or structures, and really walking the talk by reducing emissions themselves. For us in Standard Chartered, transition and green financing are the main levers for us to help achieve clients for their net zero targets. We play a very central role as an intermediary between the supply and demand for capital, as lender, arranger, investor, both emerging markets and carbon-intensive sectors to transition to net zero. Next slide, please. Decarbonization is a key focus for Standard Chartered, but we actually have started our sustainability journey about 20 years ago. We have incorporated principles as well as position statements actually in our embracing actually of the sustainable finance. 70% of our sustainable assets are in emerging markets and developing economies. In the past year alone, we have increased our sustainable asset base by about 140% to 9.2 billion. And we plan to continue the trajectory. So you can see actually that the focus is super clear actually on sustainability. Clean tech, oil and gas, metals and mining, power sectors, as well as consumer and healthcare are among our focus sectors, supporting and enabling the transition to a low carbon economy with sustainable finance innovation. Next slide, please. Now, from our perspective as a bank, actually, we have set actually two commitments to net zero. First one is a net zero from our own operations by 2030. And the second one, because we're a bank, net zero from our financing by 2050. We recently released a three-part plan of cutting finance emission, mobilizing capital, and accelerating solutions to support a just transition in our markets. This includes our commitment to mobilize $300 billion in green and transition finance by 2030, so within 8 years' time. At the moment, about 33 of our 60 footprint markets globally do not at present have a commitment to reach net zero by 2050. Obviously, Indonesia is one of the most progressive one because we do have that. Many of these markets are currently reliant on carbon-intensive industries for their continued economic growth, and that is why we are accelerating new solutions to support a just transition in our markets. Next one, please. This is an overview actually of how we integrate ESG criteria into all of our lending decisions. Just one thing I wanted to highlight over here is that this is not just a set actually of that governs actually the way that we do our financing, but it is also consisting actually a set of guidance of what we can't have actually in our financing, which would mean actually there are clients actually who are not let's just say actually aligned with our vision actually where we would have to part ways. And we have done that in the past. Next slide, please. Now, the markets and sectors that require the most financing to transition is to low carbon business models are often left out of green finance. And we talked about the heavy carbon industries. In emerging markets, as it happened, they also tend to be the sectors that are essentially essential for livelihoods and economic growth. We must, in order to achieve it, we must transition 8 of the most carbon-intensive sectors in our portfolio. So we have actually sort of divided that actually and mapped it out. We want to ensure that capital flows to the best performing clients actually with progressive sustainability agenda. Even those in traditionally high carbon-intensive sectors. So oil and gas, metals and mining, and power generation here makes up the biggest carbon-intensive industries which we are supporting in our portfolio. So what we're asking is that our clients in carbon-intensive sectors to have a credible and public strategy to transition their business in line with the Paris Agreement. Those who are just starting on their journeys, we will provide sector-specific guidance on what to do to prepare for a low-carbon future tailored to regional considerations. Those who haven't launched their climate transition effort yet, we will help identify the most relevant transition levers to create climate transition plans aligned to our own climate ambitions. However, for those who are unable or unwilling to meet that requirement, then that's actually where we must part ways. Next slide, please. Given the time, I think actually I'll move on actually to the next slide. I will really touch upon this particular sort of aspect that we strongly believe as a very key enabler in supporting transition to net zero, which is the voluntary carbon markets. So next slide. Now, supporting the efficient movement of capital and technology to reduce carbon emissions as fast as possible without slowing development is important. Now, what cannot be decarbonized needs to be effectively compensated. So leveraging on nature-based solutions or the NBS and partaking in robust and transparent voluntary carbon markets will be key. So to put simply, carbon markets, as we all know, put a price on carbon to incentivize businesses to reduce their carbon emissions where it is most financially feasible, and act now to manage the negative effects that they can't eliminate, because the concept is essentially reduce, report, and offset. Effective and robust carbon markets are a really key component to help carbon-intensive companies make that transition. The carbon markets can help channel money or projects or activities that reduce or remove emissions, remove carbon from the environment. And in this case, both the compliance and voluntary carbon markets are key enablers of decarbonization. So the high quality carbon credits can help corporates compensate and neutralize carbon emissions. This is shown in a forecast of global demand for voluntary carbon markets. We are expecting the voluntary carbon markets to increase by 15-fold by 2030 and up to 200-fold by 2050. According to a ecosystem marketplace research, the voluntary carbon market values has broken $1 billion, an all-time high as of last year. Next slide, please. Now, Asia. When we talk about Asia, ASEAN and the broader Asia Pacific will be key sources of sizable supply of low-cost carbon credits. 50% of global carbon credit revenue opportunity rests in Asia. So by working together to measure and trade carbon, ASEAN countries will be able to develop projects that reduce carbon emissions and boost the investment needed to create sustainable jobs and economic growth. Indonesia itself is the top country. I mean, it's a natural capital superpower, essentially, for NBS project development in Asia. And it has also the highest return on investment from NBS. Next slide. Last but not least, just wanted to highlight that Standard Chartered stands rather uniquely in the global roadmap actually for carbon trading. Our CEO, Bill Winters, global CEO, actually given the chair the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets. I call them actually the buyers club, because it consists of all of these companies who have embraced net zero voluntarily, and they would need carbon credits actually to help offset actually their emissions in the future. We are also a founding partner of Asia's first commodity exchange carbon credit platform called Climate Impact X in Singapore. In Indonesia, we are a founding member of sorry, actually not in Indonesia, actually, but we're a founding member of Carbon Place, a new platform that's being developed by a group of financial institutions to provide settlements infrastructure and system for marketplaces and exchanges in the VCM, or voluntary carbon market. In Indonesia, we are part of a consortium that established or working together to create a first carbon credit backed bond. It's probably a little bit ahead of the time actually right now, but we are also developing a prototype of pilot commercial financing for the upstream carbon credit generation projects. So similar actually to the mining sector maybe 20 years ago, actually what we're doing now is trying actually to emulate that and support the development, because Indonesia needs actually quite a lot of project developments on the carbon credit generations. Last but not least, we believe actually that it is really, after talking actually about how much capital is needed to the emerging markets where it's needed the most in terms of achieving net zero, it is really time to put words into actions, and collaboration between private and public sector is really needed. Thank you, and I'll take questions actually later during the discussions. Thank you, and back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Pak Doni, for your time, and also the presentation is really insightful information in regards to the support that financial industries actually have into this net carbon, net zero target that Indonesia is actually having. And it's also good to actually understand transition financing positions, should we say, into moving into those targets, not only limiting into those green industry, but also the financing to actually reduce some of the high carbon emission industries. So thank you for that. So we'll continue later on that discussion in the forum. Now I would like to for us to move into the panel discussion session, the highlight probably of this event today. Firstly, I would like to welcome our panelists. First one is Insinyur Medizam, Master Professor Economy, PhD, the Director of Environmental Affairs, Ministry of National Development Planning, Bappenas. Second one, Bapak Syahril Ahmad Atas, Senior Vice President Enterprise Risk Management, PT Pertamina Persero. And then the third one, Bapak Rusdi Husin, General Manager HSE, Risk Management and Crisis Team Leader from PT Adaro Energy Indonesia, TBK. And I would like to welcome or re-welcome our presenter to join our panel discussion, Bapak Doni, and also Mr. Mark Dickinson from DSS. Now, I would like to start by saying thank you, obviously, especially for the presentation that we had prior to this. Now, decarbonization and net zero is a hot topic in the past few months. We start seeing contents not only on newspapers, but even on social media. I'm also starting to see that this has gone beyond the government, industrial, and economic community, but further to the young generations as well. Our young generation has grown awareness of the environment and would like to contribute to the future. However, it is easy to misinterpret the net zero movement, and this may provide challenges. So to start off this discussion, can we start with what is net zero actually? You know, probably Mark from DSS, you may want to start by providing a bit of insight. But what is net zero?
So net zero is by 2050 hitting your zero or equivalent zero CO2 emissions for your business, meaning there's a balance between what you're capturing, what you're offsetting, and what you're producing, such that by 2050 there's a net of zero, and that is what's required to deliver the 1.5 degree RCP, the concentration pathway for CO2 set by IPCC and the IEA. So that's our target for industry.
Okay, thanks for that. And anyone else would like to add up?
Advanus, if I may give comments?
Parameter, maybe?
Yes. Well, basically for the government, the net zero is simply to say that the capacity of us to absorb is equal to what we release in terms of the emissions. That's a simple thing to say. So that's why I think, I really like the idea to underline better understanding about net zero emissions. But of course, when we talk about capacity to emit and capacity to absorb, so we cannot just talk about energy sectors, of course, because energy sectors is to reduce it. But of course, at the end of the day, we still have emissions from the energy sector, and this has to be absorbed by other sectors. For example, like land-based sectors or also other. So what I would like to underline here is that we cannot just simply to say that this is just about energy sector, but it's all about multi-sector approach. Yeah. So this is very important. So just don't create any confusions about net zero. It's not just about energy, because I see a lot of webinars, a lot of talks about net zero emissions only focus on energy sectors. But of course, energy sector is important, but it's not the only sectors that will play a big role as well in the net zero emissions. Land-based sector is also crucial, waste sectors also crucial, industry sectors, and so on and so on. Thank you. Please turn back again.
I think that's really, really good. Thank you, Pak Betro, for that. Anything else? Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that point, there is a sort of list of sectors that are the highest energy users and CO2 emitters. So to continue that list, it's oil and gas, chemicals, transport, utilities, cement, ceramics. What have I left out? All of the high energy use, high CO2 emitting industries.
Yep, yep. So obviously, in your presentation, Mark, you mentioned, that there are steps need to be taken in achieving this target. We can't just have this energy transition straight away. There are steps need to be taken to get there. And I think Pak Agus also mentioned from OJK perspective, there's a phase 1 and phase 2 and some phases to achieve that net zero by 2050, 2060, the revised schedule now. So let's say if a company, that yet to have or would like to start their net zero journey, what will be their starting points and steps that need to be taken by them? How do they start?
Am I answering that one?
Yeah, that's for you, yeah.
Okay, so the first step for me is to recognize the type of industry that you are. Certainly your approach, if you're a coal-fired power station or a coal-fueled business, you're going to have to recognize either you're going to run till you fail or you can't get any more finance. You're going to transform your operating model and your business model to diversify away from the carbon intensive business that you've been running, or you attempt to achieve a timed decline, such as the various initiatives that are around, including a just transition for coal. So once you've kind of realized where your business fits, there's then a sequence of events or a sequence of activities that I would suggest businesses consider. So that's setting some emissions and energy use targets between now and 2050, using the 1.5 or 2 degree RCP to model the risks to your business, because there's a set of physical risks that are pertinent caused by climate change that would affect your assets. Then look at operational efficiency, look at reducing your energy use and reducing your CO2 emissions through operating practices, and then consider the opportunities around you. And those opportunities would include, can I develop renewables by myself? Can I partner with someone in a similar situation? Can I partner with PLN in developing the grid? Can I divest my business into one of the areas that's needed in Indonesia? And we've already talked about the renewable opportunities in Indonesia. That and being in touch with the direction that national policies are taking, all of that adds up to a potential large hopper of opportunities and risks from which you as a firm are going to have to decide your capital investment portfolio. But looking at those influences and deciding what to invest in is the critical set of decisions that any business would have to make.
So you're basically mentioning the scope 1, the scope 2, and scope 3 as part of the steps. So scope 1 starting from your industry itself, which is the efficiency and how do you actually reduce the carbon emission from yourself, and that's scope 2 into the power source, and scope 3 into a bigger picture.
Because you heard Pat Donny saying that eventually they would not be financing certain industry sectors because they were not aligned to net zero. So that means you either shut up shop or you diversify.
Thank you for that. Pak Medril, talking from Bapenas, you mentioned about net zero it's not only energy sectors, it's the whole sectors. Obviously we discuss about how to balance basically the carbon emission. So what are the Bappenat's steps in aligning the commitments to reduce the carbon emissions in accordance with the national economic transformations, going into that net zero economy?
Yes, thank you for the very important question here, Stefanus. And I think I need to underline that when I talk about this effort, actually I'm talking about more in a country level, not in a company's level. And of course, the government of Indonesia has been very aware about this issue, and I believe starting from 2010, actually Indonesia has set our voluntary commitment for reducing emissions, starting from 2010, so 12 years ago. So I believe at that time, President SBY stated this very clearly: to reduce our emissions in 26% below the baseline in 2020, and we reached that target. And so then in 2015, we commit to improve our commitments to reduce the emissions to align with the Paris Agreement target with 29%, and we also set the new net zero emissions policy to be reached 2060 or sooner. But of course, we as the planning ministry, basically, we try, first thing to do first actually is to align all these climate ambition targets with our national development targets. Just want to inform you that I think if you read the Article 3.4 of the UNFCCC Convention, basically this is already mandated that our climate target need to be aligned with our national development target, along the side with, of course, with our economic target as well. So we cannot just sacrifice our economy just because of emission reduction. So there is no more trade-off between the two. So we have to achieve these two ambitions. Economic growth need to be established, need to be strengthened, but of course with more low emissions, low carbon activities. And so that's why we set new policies in our new RPJMN, with what we call the low carbon development policies, and also climate resilience policy. These two like a twin. These two policies like a twin, and this is actually in our RPJMN 2020 to 2024, our national planning document. Basically, this is the first time ever the government set a national priority on climate change as a top national priority. So, and this has been implemented, and we have intermediate targets in 2024 by 27.3% to reduce the emissions. And we also set new indicators, not just about to reduce emissions, but also to reduce our emission intensity. So when we said that we need to align our economic target with our emissions targets, of course we have to combine these two aspects, economy and also our emission reduction. So that's why we pick the new indicators as part of our development target, which is the reductions of our emission intensity. It's about 35%, if I'm not mistaken, in 2024, and well, we're still struggling to reach these ambitions, but we are still on track. And with these low carbon and climate resilience policies, actually this has been implemented not only just by the government, the national government, but also the local government as well. And of course, the government cannot just rely upon by itself, because the net zero emissions, the Paris Agreement target is actually a big ambitions. This need also support by the non-state actors, including the investment from the private companies. And I think what we have discussed today is really in line with what we have already planned so far. So thank you very much for this very important discussions today.
I think to have that steps to change is one important factor. But I think one of the other challenges that any country will have to actually, how do we actually sustain the change? You know, so that's achieving it is one thing, but you know, sustaining it is another thing. And what do Bapenas have or the government have in trying to support that?
Yeah, well, the point here is actually, is to include that as part of national development priorities. That's the main clue. Once you don't include that into national development priorities, and if this is just a separate, another kind of development activities, but of course, this won't be, this won't be prioritized, this won't be part of the sustainable activities that the government will be doing. Whoever the leader is, of course, this has to be part of our national development priorities. And as you might be aware that we have already had what we call our Indonesian Vision 2045. And this net zero ambitions, of course, is part of it. And the low carbon development is also as the backbone actually to reach this Indonesian Vision 2045, which is the strategy of it. Is one of it is actually the green economy, and the green economy has been backed up very strongly right now by our low carbon development policy, and this has been included as part of national development priorities. And we are planning at the moment to include this as well in our new long-term development planning in 2025 to 2045. And as you might be aware, that this planning is a law actually, and we are planning, of course, to include this when we finalize this process in the next 2 years.
Thank you for that. And obviously, you know, with the support with the financial industry, Parino, you know, I sort of touched on this after your presentation. It is very interesting when I had a look at your or Standard Chartered Bank ESG criteria for the lending decisions, and then you mentioned there was some industry that had quite, let's say, energy intensive that you're willing to actually, or Standard Chartered is actually has moved into financing. So that's really important. So what are the approach for this transition financing? For example, you know, for metals mining and fossil fuel powered generation. What approach the financing? How do they get finance?
So thank you, but and perhaps actually let me just clarify very quickly actually that, well, essentially it's not that we are abandoning or selecting certain sectors. In fact, actually what I was saying earlier is that we fully understand that carbon intensive sectors are typically the ones struggling to find financing. And we can't leave them behind, and that's the reason actually why we are also focusing actually on the carbon intensive industries, because they need help the most, along with emerging markets from a geographic perspective. Now, of course, actually there are conditions in which we would want to be aligned actually with our clients in those heavy carbon sectors where they must have credible a transition plan aligned with the Paris Agreement, you know, and it's, you know, the measures in which actually that they've taken actually all of these activities actually are validated and the likes of that. So I think the key here is that there has to be a strong willingness from within the top of the organization or the clients in this case or companies to make that leap towards net zero. And we would help them actually to create the path, if you will, towards net zero, and of course along the way on the financing side. But when you talk about criteria, the first and foremost important matter is that credible plan towards net zero.
So the roadmap needs to
I would
be
also,
there.
Donny, add that every company is different. Every company faces different challenges, subject to different risks, and with the possibility of different opportunities. So there's no golden formula for producing a net zero roadmap. It's not prescriptive. It requires an analysis of each company, the risks and opportunities that it faces, its ability to get finance, and synthesizing those into something that meets and aligns with national policies and targets. That requires support and expertise applied to each company.
No, I can't agree more with you. I can't agree more. In fact, it's not just every company, but if you look at how the sovereigns are transitioning toward the net zero, every country in the world is different. So that's that just transition that I mentioned about, and I think in the Indonesian context, it's just an affordable transition becomes very paramount.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, Pak Syahril, from Pertamina, you've been a bit quiet. So, as oil and gas company, obviously, directly impacted by this net zero economy, especially in the scope 1 of emissions. Can you please share some of the Pertamina strategy into transitioning to net zero? How did you start? Are there roadmaps? Yeah. Can you share with us?
Yeah, thank you. As an oil and gas company, and now we started change to energy providing company. Actually, yeah, it's the same things to implement net zero. That's why formally, I think several couple of years ago we started this program. We focusing. We have a strategic initiative on that, and then right now we are formulating our net zero roadmap aligned with the government to 2060, while increasing decarbonization in our industry, such as increasing the use of solar for providing electricity, for gas power, and also maybe increasing the geothermal. This may be part of our strategy to also cope with the decarbonization. Meanwhile, this year's we targeted maybe a bit ambitious, whereby we target to reduce our carbon emission by around 2,000 ton CO2 equivalents by making a lot of our investment project more green. We see that this is unavailable. So because just like Pak Tony said that nowadays financial institution is ask us to imply and align with all the ESG rules before they can actually give us some financing. While to reduce the emission is also need a lot of capital. That's why maybe we are very keen to increase our ability to become net zero.
Yeah. Okay. So from that experience, what do you think could have been improved to assist the transition better for Pertamina? Or what are the challenges that Pertamina has faced in transitioning?
I think, like I mentioned, the transition, I think is the natural thing that have to be done. But have said, if you are not changed, will be forgotten, maybe, or maybe will not be there anymore. So starting a few years ago, we see that cannot we just rely on oil and gas. We have to become an energy company. We provide more clean energy in terms of oil and gas. We produce more environment friendly. So that's why we revamping our refinery by making them produce more environment friendly products, maybe based on Euro 4 or even Euro 5. So somehow we can have some positive to the reducing of the carbon emission. While in other aspect, we increase our new and renewable energy, such as solar panel and then geothermal. But the challenge is, especially with geothermal, it might be recognized that it needs more complicated technology that maybe needs more capital, while maybe in terms of the electricity that being sold to the grid is being, regulated. That's why maybe we need some support from financial institution to make us able to grow our project capability in terms of providing electricity from new and renewable energy. That's why previously, I think a couple years ago, through a World Bank, we finally have also get financing, very cheap financing, long tenor, very cheap, and also given carbon credit as part of the financing itself. But the challenge is still there. We have to increase the capability to reduce transmission. We do have just like a program to carbon capture storage, just like I mentioned previously, but still in study, and there's still a discussion whether it's a good things to do, because you're not transmit the emission, but you send it back to the earth. Is it the good things to do or something else? But in terms of Pertamina, we do have a plan to use that carbon that produced by our drilling to also increase our capacity as an EOR and as oil recovery. And this is been studied, and we hope that within 1 or 2 years it will be implemented, part of our strategy to increase the oil capacity production, while also minimize the emission that we produce from our activities.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you.
What about from Pak Rusdi from Adaro? Transitioning to net zero, I believe it will be quite a challenge, especially for a coal producer company. So probably you can share some of the experiences, challenges, and then probably the strategy that Adaro has in trying to do that.
Thanks for the questions, Pak Stefanus. Yes, it is quite challenging for us. As you may aware that, we cut the trees, and then we move the soil, and then we dig the coal, and then ship out the coal, and then we burn the coal. Yeah, the carbon footprint is there. Yeah. So, having said with regard the carbon neutral or decarbonizations or net zero emissions, so it is quite understood by the board of the Are Dss Indonesia. We are putting the strategy for changing the Adaro business so that gradually we can reduce the carbon emissions from our stream business. Aside for that, it is perceived by the company that actually the issue with regard to climate change, also with the net zero emission, etc., it is well perceived as the opportunity, not as the threat. Yeah, because we see when the trend is going to the different destinations, to the green economy, green energy, etc., so the opportunity is there actually. And then we are moving to that directions currently. So having back to 3 years ago, we produced the policy with regard to greenhouse gas and also energy, published to the corporate level, and then it should be embraced by all the groups. You know, as you know that we have some business pillar from the mining, services, logistics, power, land, water, and recently we just established a new business so-called the other minerals. Yeah, so all those business streams should embrace the policy that published by the board. They need to identify the energy energy performance indicators, energy baseline, and also they need to identify the greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc. So unfortunately, soon after we published the policy, the COVID-19 came to our globe, so that we need to pause for a while. And then last year, the board strongly pushing all the component within the Adaro Energy Indonesia. They need to start to establish net zero emissions. And then we are now in process with a consultant to establish the net zero emissions. We just recently conducted a kickoff meeting, a gap analysis, executive briefing, and soon we will conduct a workshop to identify the carbon footprint, scope 1 and scope 2. And then following that, we will come up with the journey how we can achieve the net zero emissions. Our hypothesis, again, this is still hypothesis 2050, but again, the consultant will help us to define more precise in what years that actually we can achieve the net zero emissions in what years. Yeah. So our hypothesis 2050. And then underpin the initiative, the board already established 4 initiatives. The brown business initiative. It means the current backbone business, what are the greenhouse gas emissions, and then what is the initiative that we could embrace so that we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. That's the first initiative. Secondly is the green nature solutions. We have 2 big forest assets in central Kalimantan, and now we are in the process engaging a consultant to establish the PDD, and then currently they're in the at site to observe, to analyze the biomass above the land, so that at the end of the day we can identify how much carbon sequestrations at that 2 forest assets. Yeah. And then that's the initiative number 2. And then initiative number 3 is the definitely renewable energy businesses like solar, hydropower, biomass, etc., is now under the table of our board. And now we are in the journey to execute those initiatives fast, so that gradually we can reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And then last but not least is about the green manufacturing. As you may aware that in the electric vehicle, definitely we need nickel, aluminum, and also every time we produce the 1 megawatt of the wind turbine, we need the metallurgical coal, we need the aluminum there. And then when if we produce the solar panel, definitely we need the silicon, aluminum, and other minerals. Currently, we are in the process to develop manufacturing aluminum smelter in Kaltara, and then it just groundbreaking by Pak Jokowi, the industrial estate in Kaltara, the largest industrial estate, I believe, in Southeast Asia, which is all the electricity is fed by renewable energy such as hydropower and also solar panel. Yeah. How about the challenges? Yeah, the challenges definitely how we can balancing the capex and opex, etc., etc. And definitely we need help from the banks. Yeah. So the bank will finance us so that we can swiftly transition to the more renewable energy. As I mentioned before, there are 4 initiatives here. So definitely we need the support from the banks in order to realize those opportunities. I think, hope answered the questions, Pak.
Oh, it does, it does. Thank you so much for that information. Obviously, I think we all in agreement in here. The collaboration is very important in achieving Indonesian net zero in here. We hear it from the various sectors of industry. Now, I would like to really move on to question and answers question. There are some questions that some of our audience actually throw at us. So probably some of the experts can assist us in answering these questions. There's a question from Pak Nanang from PT Adiagraha. The bottom line in here, I think we already challenged this, already answered this. What is the need for energy transitions? What can be the effect of the energy transitions? So, anyone would like to answer that?
I think I'll just try to answer that one, if you mind.
Yep.
Yes, just like previously, I think we are just an oil and gas company. That's why Pertamina stands for that. Pertamina is perusahaan minyak and gas. But we see maybe several years ago that we have to transform not just providing oil and gas, but now providing energy. And by having this kind of transition, we are trying to evolve and then provide more clean energy to the country, especially. And if we are not change our goal and making our business, I think we are be left behind or will not be here anymore, because as discussed with panel and the speaker previously, now people have to think about net zero, clean energy, and everything. So we have to change. We have to provide energy, and we also realize that fossil fuel is sometime will be not there anymore. Indonesia, we see that previously we are exported of oil and gas. Now we are net imported. So by having said that, the change, the transformation should be done, especially for Pertamina as energy provider for the country. Back to you, Stefanus.
Can I add to that, Stefanus? So ultimately, it means having a business that is sustainable into the future. It means having a business that's aligned and supporting your national energy transition. It means having a business that can still be financed and financeable and doesn't set aside as a problem actor, because I think one of the collective lessons I've learned today is that in Indonesia, it's not going to be long. If you don't have an energy transition plan, your business is going to start to see difficulties.
Yep. So it's just not about what is energy transition, but it's about transitioning to green economy. Obviously, like Pak Doni mentioned earlier in our presentations. The other questions that was there is, what are the barriers in moving into energy transition? Probably Mark would like to answer that.
Yes, the barriers for any company starting this journey are knowing the landscape in which you can make decisions, collecting all of the risks and opportunities and national policies that affect your business, knowing the opportunities around you geographically, around your assets, and making capital planning decisions based on those influences. That's being aware of all of that takes some doing, and it is not every company does it. But now that we're in energy transition, the era of energy transition, the awareness of companies has to extend into this full range of risks and identify opportunities wherever they emerge, because those opportunities are going to be competitive. And someone's going to jump on them geographically if you don't. So the awareness of risks, opportunities, and legislation, national targets and policies is the set of materials from which decisions now need to be made.
Yeah, I guess probably the government regulations in actually setting up those targets is obviously it's one thing that try to break those barriers in a way, into opening up into opportunities. Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, Stefan, I think, I think just previously mentioned, I think the regulation of the government also somehow push us to maybe have the program faster than maybe previously strategized, but to push and somehow aggressively do the things, the project itself, things just like I mentioned previously, that we need the support because to transition the energy, maybe not by having a cliff walk, but we have to steward the states, maybe just like providing more environment friendly products based on Euro 5. We need to revamp or build a new refinery that maybe needs not $1-2 billion US, but sometimes more than $5-6 billion is a lot of money that we have to provide. And I think the support from the financial institution to make it happen is very important. And nowadays, I think the ESG becomes one of the major things that being asked for us, especially that as refiners and also crude and gas providers. But I think the opportunity is there. We see that transition energy is good for us, but although it's not directly, but maybe step by step. As you may aware, Indonesia have a lot of gas producers, so maybe we can transform from using product from crude by using gas first, and then increasing our geothermal, and maybe also start to increase the use of solar PV or hydro, anything that's maybe more green. I think this from Pertamina perspective.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the barriers and the opportunities, obviously, and the regulation is there to support the opportunities, and we also have the financial institution, financial industry is there, is trying to move into net zero economy, and they're willing to support the new technology, all the opportunities in trying to break that barriers. So this is
Stefanos, if I may,
Yep.
sorry, actually, if I may make actually just one point, actually, since you touch upon on
Please
the,
do.
on the public sector side, from a policy framework and so on. I think there's one big challenge, and I think this is actually down to all of the governments in the world and the multilaterals to help, address. The issue is actually what we have now that has become impediment to capital flow, financial support, or even, more and more companies embracing net zero is because there are just too many standards at the moment. We still have different taxonomies across regions, and they need standardization. So what we need is a common ESG taxonomy or sets of standards which addresses the needs of investors and businesses across jurisdictions at different levels of economic and social development. So the key word here is to ensure that all the different taxonomies across markets, regions, and so on, actually, they are interoperable. So aligning them actually would not be possible in our view, actually, but making them, having that interoperability is so key. And I think actually that's also one of the focus at certainly the B20, and I believe actually that under Indonesia's leadership at the G20 as well.
Stefanos, if I may.
Yes, please do.
Yes. Basically, what I would like to underline here, with regards to the just transition and affordable transitions, is actually a strong signal from not only by government, but also from multilateral framework that we have already agreed in COP26. That yes, actually we are confident that we will be transform our brown energy to the green energy. That's the signal that we have to deliver very strongly. And I believe the government has sent this signal very strongly to all stakeholders. But what we need to underline again is actually how then to transfer this signal into a more real actions, and which creates ecosystems that can enable these transitions can be happening. For example, we have policies, of course, it's already in place. We have our planning document, we have our planning policies, and blah, blah, blah. But what is the important thing which is still missing is about regulations. How then we can ensure the regulations for the renewable energy in place, so then these transitions can be secure. Actually, we're still processing our renewable energy law still in the parliament, and we know we still haven't had any conclusions with our feed-in tariff with regards to the something like for the renewable energy. So I think this is one of the important obstacles that probably become a very strong homework to be resolved in the near future. Once these regulations be in place, I believe this could be send a very more stronger signal to the market. So then the companies can also be sure that they are secure to do these transitions. Without a very strong regulations, I believe it is a bit difficult for the renewable energy at the moment to compete with the current fossil fuels. Still, fossil fuels still being subsidized very strongly. So I think there are a lot of combinations and aspects that probably need to be considered, and I believe regulation is one part of it, and this could create a very strong ecosystem for companies to ensure that to make sure themselves to move from their current positions. Okay. Over back to you.
Yeah. Anyone else would like to add?
Yeah, Stefanos from Adero side. Yeah. I assume that my position, our position here is representing the coal industry or mining sectors. The challenging that should be tackled by all stakeholders involved in the mining operations. As you may aware that before we cut the trees at the day one, we need to establish the documents. What will happen? What's the surrounding of our mining concession look like if after we complete the operations, after we shut down the operations? This is very unique industries. In the assessment documents, we need to identify the impact to the the surrounding community, the impact for the environment, etc., etc. So the thing that I think in my perceptions currently during the policy with regard to transition, the energy transitions, in order to achieve the net zero goals in 2060, I think government needs to, to make some sort of regulations to combine the net zero emission journey, the transition journey, into the post-mining closure programs. So I think, this is quite important, since the just transitions is reflected from those documents in the mining sectors. So when we start to change the operations, gradually minimize the coal mining, so the impact to the economy of the surrounding community, to the social and culture of the community is extremely impacted. As a simple example, Pak Stefanus, the two cities surrounding our mining operations in South Kalimantan, the national budget, APBD, is around 40 to 50% from the royalty of Adaro. So, if the just transitions isn't well established carefully, so the impact will be, severely to the community and also to the local governments. So, from the government side, I think government side need to scrutinize more detailed regulations about the post-mining programs with regard to transitions, with regard to, the net zero emission roadmap to 2060. I think that's from our side. Yeah. Thank you, Stefanus.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you, Rusti. I think, this whole net zero transition is obviously a work in progress. It's a process. It's required further collaborations. And we're at the moment, at the starting point, critical point to actually have that collaboration, to work together and move towards that solutions that can be beneficial to all the parties, all the stakeholders. So this is why we have this discussion today. We try to open up that communication from different sectors, different parties. Okay, I'm really conscious of time. This is really hot topic, obviously. We try to discuss, probably if we have one whole day to discuss it, it's not even going to be enough. I think it's just a really ongoing process that we have to go through. So I would just like to close this, if I may. The researchers said the transition will have a universal, significant, and uneven effect across sectors, geographies, and communities. But at the same time, there's opportunity for growth depending on how companies approach it. Panelists today shared some of the strategies and mapped each sector's stakeholders' role and contribution in supporting the net zero journey for companies in Indonesia. Indonesia's commitment in transitioning to net zero is real, and action for companies to play their roles to taking the first step into green economy is imminent. This is not something that each company can do alone. It needs broader initiatives, whether they are internal or external stakeholders. The first step, however, need to be taken by the C-level management and company's leader. Building that understanding on how a net zero world will affect the organization. Cracking the problem can sometimes start by collaboration and realizing that you need help. I certainly hope that we can continue the discussion outside this forum and develop them even further in achieving Indonesia's goal to a net zero economy. I would also encourage companies leaders to start discussing internally and externally on transitioning to net zero, also to seek help to start cracking the problem. DSS do have experts that can assist with that. Strategic advice on setting up vision, building net zero roadmap, transitioning to finance, and also roadmap delivery. I believe today's forum does add value for everyone, all the audience and the panelists, and encourage stakeholders to start the conversation. DSS, as one of the main stakeholders in this journey, would love to partake its role in this journey. I would like to hear from companies and to discuss in more personalized fashion on how Dss Plus can partner with your company on this journey. I insist that you give us a call and say hi and start the communication just like we did today. Okay, so I would like to thank you all the panelists and our attendees in today's forum in the discussion about the sustainable future. It's a very hot topic. I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Bapak Agus Siregar, who had to leave early. Bapak Medril, thank you so much for your contribution. Pak Syahril, thank you so much for your time. Pak Doni, thank you so much for providing us the insight from the financial institution. And Pak Rusdi, thank you for sharing some of the Adara steps in achieving net zero. Last but not least, Mark, thank you so much for your time and also your contribution to this forum. I would like to also thank Bisnis Indonesia and team for organizing this event. So we are about to end this virtual. So anything would like to add? Anyone as a last comment?
Terima kasih, Pak Stefanus.
Thank you so much, Mark, for that. Okay, Stefanus Valen here from Studio Stage Plus Bisnis Indonesia. Would like to close this forum. Thank you all, and see you on the next event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Mizal, Pak Rusdi.
Thank you everyone, Pak Salim.
Thank you, everyone. Stefanus.
Semuanya. Terima kasih.